Here we are going to look at an exam question for component 1 GCSE PE, which is on fitness and body systems. Now, this one's slightly difficult, this actual exam question, but the good thing about it is actual response here gained a level 3. Now, as you can see from the first part of the question, we are looking at tennis players and the different intensities that they work at. Now, there are 3 different phases that we need to comment on. We need to comment on phase 1, which is during a serve, phase 2, which is during a rally or a long intensity rally where they're working for a long period of time, and their rest periods as well, because as we know, when we watch tennis, they do have rest periods in between games and sets as well. And if you look here, the question, it says examine the importance of the respiratory system during these different phases. So it goes without saying, for this question, we need to comment on the actual each phase of the respiratory system. So we will be commenting on the respiratory system at these different intervals within a match, within a tennis match. Now, as we know from the mark scheme, AO1, AO2 and AO3, to achieve AO1 for this particular exam question, to gain 3 marks for AO1, you need to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the respiratory system. To gain 3 marks within AO2, you need to discuss the application of knowledge linking the respiratory system to the sport. Obviously, we're focusing on tennis because the sport has been given to us. And also, to gain AO3, the evaluation side of the question, we need to be making reasoned judgments about the importance of the respiratory system throughout the various intensities of the match. So again, we need to be discussing the serve, the rally, and the resting periods within the actual match. Now, this is actually very well structured and very well written. So let's break it down and take it through for you guys. What they've done here on this particular candidate is they've actually given an introductory paragraph. Not essential, but although the opening paragraph is an introductory, it does actually contain AO1 content, because as you can see here, there is clear knowledge of the respiratory system and the actual functions in terms of removing waste products such as carbon dioxide and obviously supplying fresh oxygen to enable you to compete. Now, the thing I like about this particular question is it's very well structured and it breaks each paragraph down. And there's a line left in between, so it helps the examiner with a marking, and it is clear what is actually going on here, guys. So the first one here, this is paragraph number 1. Okay, pretty straightforward. Begins the evaluation of the importance of the respiratory system during the serve and justifies why it's less important at this point. Now, the good thing about this is a clear AO1, AO2, AO3 content in this structure. So he actually goes through each particular phase of the mark scheme looking within the serve. Now, there's clear knowledge and understanding of the respiratory system in this paragraph, because as you can see here, it talks about the oxygen providing the working muscles at this actual point. Okay, now this is because serves involve short, sharp bursts of energy, power, meaning that energy can be produced through an anaerobic respiration system, because we know that anaerobic is where we use less oxygen, okay, which is actually very good. Now, it talks about the presence of oxygen here within the AO2, and in order to achieve it properly, it talks about for the rest of the match, the way in which it is applied, guys. So you've got a clear definition of AO1 there, understanding of the respiratory system. It's actually linking it to the sport and the performance, because we're talking about the phases of the serve, and there's a clear evaluation as to whether it is effective on their actual performance. And it talks about successful serves here just by the red line, and actual the muscles being supplied with oxygen. So there's clear structure to this actual paragraph. Now, this is actually very good because the AO1, AO2 and AO3 structure is contained and actually structured in each of the paragraphs afterwards, okay? So looking at the separate phases, and there's a clearly development at each point of the paragraph for AO1, AO2 and AO3. So looking at this next paragraph here, if I just use a different colour for this, let's go green, use red for the last one, we go green here. This paragraph here, pretty straightforward. We're looking at the rally now. So it then goes on to say, however, during the rally, so there's a clear structure. We are now talking about the separate phase of the game and the actual match that the tennis player is playing. Talking about the respiratory system being essential at this point, saying it is sustained for a long period time. Then in a comparison with the surf, saying that unlike the surf, aerobic respiration is needed. So that obviously means that the body needs to be provided with much more oxygen and obviously energy, because they'll be contracting their muscles for a long period of time. So as you can see, there's a clear description for AO1 and there's a clear explanation for AO2 saying why it is actually important at this phase of the actual tennis match. In terms of AO3, it then talks about fatigue levels and maintaining high levels of performance, guys. Okay, pretty straightforward. And then it starts to talk about the intensity of the actual rally, meaning that there will be an increased breathing rate, which allows your body to supply the relevant oxygen required to maintain movement and actually perform for a long period of time here. So that's your AO1, AO2 and AO3 covered there. And the final skill, the actual final phase, is actually the ability to rest and take decent rest periods in an actual tennis match. So we just get a different colour over here. We go blue for this one, guys. So this is the final one here, where we're talking about the resting. Now, obviously, it is important to rest. So AO1 is covered here because it talks about the actual way in which you can breathe properly, but also particularly looking at the build-up of lactic acid, that waste product being built up within the anaerobic respiratory system, guys, okay? And it then goes on to develop into AO2 because it then talks about oxygen debt and the person's breathing rates here, okay? The actual athlete's breathing rate in terms of repaying that oxygen debt. Good key word here that I like, actually prevents DOMS, which actually talks about fatigue. Now, DOMS is delayed onset muscle soreness. We want to avoid this from occurring because DOMS is where your muscles ache for a couple of days afterwards, up to 72 hours, 3 days after actual taking part. So again, dispersing this lactic acid is key. It then goes on to say how this will actually help them to maintain to a higher standard. So making sure that we can obviously decrease the amount of lactic acid to prevent DOMS is going to ensure that this particular athlete maintains their highest standard of performance, okay? And in particular here, again, it talks about the entire match, going for that whole match, being successful and to win, using these rest periods properly to overcome the actual oxygen debt and oxygen supply, which can lead to this actually occurring here. So there's a good structure here, guys, for the final part, in terms of there's an AO1, which is just covered, outlining the knowledge of the respiratory system here. Okay, in AO2, we're talking about the way in which it is linked to the sport with tennis, so they're talking about lactic acid and the way in which it can impact on their performance. And finally, with AO3 here, it's actually giving a decent evaluation topic, explaining the actual varied intensities and how the rest period can have a very, very important impact on their performance. And just finally, to finish off, which I believe is actually quite good standards, it's not essential and it doesn't add more marks, but it's clear here, if I just use a darker blue, there's actually a conclusion here, which actually rounds it off quite nicely, guys. So you've gone through all three of the phases with your AO1, AO2 and AO3. And now in conclusion, it's just summing up why they think it is essential for them to maintain their rest periods and how it can impact with their oxygen supply. This actually rounds off the assignment well because it gives a valid conclusion as to why all three of these areas have been covered. Like I said earlier, this is a very high standard. This is a level 3 and this is actually 9 out of 9 marks, guys. So this is how you achieve 9 out of 9 for this particular question for respiratory systems.